arrived in the late 20s, but there were still some sets in the early 30s that had to have external speakers, and we've got a selection of such speakers to look at here. This is the earliest one, around about 1924, I should think, and it's a GEC G3ETH. That was the logo adopted by the General Electric Company. They also gave a bit of a pronunciation problem, because even now people don't really know whether to call them G3ETHs, Gekaphones, Gekaphones, or whatever, but I call them G3ETHs. Always have this characteristic label on. This is a horn speaker, but it's folded up or re-entrant so that it doesn't occupy the big space that one of these horns occupies, but is more compact. We just turn it round, have a look from the back, see what I mean. You can see the horn, which is, as it were, folded up on itself rather like a shell. This is the driver unit, which is really nothing more than a large-sized iron diaphragm headphone unit. The iron diaphragm type of headphones have been around since the 1880s, and they were adopted for use as loudspeakers, just a little larger than the conventional headphone unit, but exactly the same principle. This horn is made of something like papier-mâché or compressed cardboard. Quite an old speaker, that, not many of those about, and it was designed for use with an amplifier. This is a two-stage amplifier which was designed to sit underneath, form the base of a receiver which stood on top. The receiver was a two-valve receiver, capable of working headphones but not a loudspeaker, so if you wanted to work loudspeakers you bought one of these amplifiers, G3ETH of course, to sit underneath it. The switch on the front enables you to use either one or two stages, off-center, and one or two stages according to the way you switched it. These are filament controls for the valves, and you can see the two valves. These are original valves. The very first model of this particular amplifier would have had bright emitters with top pips, but this is a slightly later set of valves which were came in a few years later with conventional bottom seals. The original valves would have been bright emitters, and in order to see whether they were lit and perhaps to provide a bit of ventilation as well, you had these windows on the side so that you could look through them, through the mesh, and see that the valve was lit. Transformer coupled, pair of transformers here, and switching arrangements to enable you to have one or two stages. So that is the G3ETH two-valve amplifier with re-entrant type horn speaker. Now these are open type horn speakers. This one is made by a firm called Amplion, very well-known firm in the audio business over the years, starting in the early 20s. Rather a nice shape. It's a petal horn, and it's made of segments of oak held together with metal folded metal strips and a metal edging. It's described officially as a polished oak trumpet is the official description, and the swan neck is rather a nice shape. This is not the original driver. This is a headphone which has been adapted for use as a driver. It works at low volumes and produces a nice vintage tinny sound. The second horn speaker we've got is a smaller job made by S.G. Brown, another well-known firm in the audio business, and whereas this is a wooden cone, a wooden trumpet, this is a metal trumpet and a metal neck as well, metal horn. This part's referred to as the horn and this part is the trumpet. Again, it's a large size headphone unit, and you can adjust the, I don't know whether you can hear that click as the diaphragm moves into a critical position and flops in and out, and you obtain the most sensitive position. The other horn, which you've already seen on the cabinet set on an earlier picture, is made by Listen. In fact, this is a mixed sort of item. The driver part is an original Listen. The horn may not be. It was I obtained this in two parts, and this is not necessarily a Listen horn, but it's a typical shape of horn from the period. Rather pretty shapes, and I remember having one of those in our house when I was a small boy, and was formed quite a feature of the room, of course. So that's a small selection of horn speakers, and we can move on now to another type of speaker.
No.
Now here are some cone speakers as distinct from the horn type. Instead of having a diaphragm at the same type as the old headphone, you have an armature fixed between the pole pieces of a magnet, so that this is attached to a paper cone, which of course generates the sound waves. So these are known as cone type balanced armature or armature type moving iron speakers, sometimes is the name given to them. This is a G3ETH stalk motif. You can see the shape of the stalk here in the rushes. About 1929, I should think. And the speaker cloth has faded somewhat. This should be a sort of golden colour, but over the years, of course, the gold particles disappeared and the whole thing becomes rather grubby, but at least it's intact. One of the dangers of speakers over the years, of course, is that the cloth gets torn, things get poked in it or scratched and so on, and you finish up having to replace the cloth, and of course it's very difficult to get authentic cloths. They just don't make those sort of things except at great expense. So that's the G3ETH oak cabinet stalk motif speaker. You can get it in mahogany at a slightly higher price. Oak was the common wood for these things, and it was always a bit cheaper than mahogany or other models. This is a BTH Bakelite speaker. Bakelite, of course, is a collector's item in its own right. A lot of people collect Bakelite objects, whether they're to do with wireless or with anything. So a Bakelite speaker is quite a collectible item. This is rather a good one. It's a cone type, again, with an adjustment on the rear so that you could get the armature in the right position for maximum sensitivity. Two terminals down here. These are all high impedance speakers. Work directly from the anode of the output valve, usually, possibly in the best receivers, as we mentioned before, via the choke capacity output network. The next one we look at, we'll just move this G3ETH out of the way, is a Blue Spot. Blue Spot were a well-known make. I don't know whether they eventually became Blaupunkt. It's Blaupunkt, of course, is German for Blue Spot, but whether it was the same company, I'm not sure. I don't think it was, actually. And this is an open frame speaker for mounting in your own cabinet. obtain this. It was in entirely the wrong sort of cabinet and didn't quite fit, so I took it out because I think it's a more interesting demonstration model in its open form. You can see the horseshoe magnet and well, you can't actually see the armature, but it's balanced between the poles of the horseshoe magnet, and the energizing coil causes the armature to vibrate and operate the paper cone, which has the blue spot motif in the middle. This move the BTH speaker. This is a blue spot cabinet, a typical blue spot design of the period, but the speaker inside that is similar to this one, but probably slightly smaller. The other famous name in loudspeakers is Celestion, and this is again a paper cone moving iron speaker in a rather nice oak cabinet, quite heavy, with a decorative grille and no cloth, just some strings, just to take off the blank look, I suppose, of the aperture. You can see the cone inside there, and on the back the adjusting knob to get the diaphragm in the most sensitive position. So that's a selection of horn and cone speakers. We've got one more cone speaker here to look at. This one, it's a bit of an oddball. Anyone who's studied cabinet design and speakers will immediately recognise that is very likely American. In fact, it's almost certainly American. They were rather fond of these what they call cathedral designs, and a bit of a musical theme on the front grille. This is just a cardboard cutout. The cabinet is made of, I thought it was papier-mâché when I first got it, but it's rather harder. It's a composition of some sort, moulded, probably quite good acoustically, but rather an unusual material for these speaker cabinets. It's a cone speaker, quite a good quality one, but it's painted with something that looks like, well, I always think of it as treacle. It's sort of very rough cast sort of finish, because of it's melted and flowed down. I don't think it's one of the most attractive speakers, but it is unusual, so it's worth having. So that's the last of the cone speakers that I've got to show you. Now moving on to the 30s, the moving coil speaker in the sort of general form that we know it today started to come in about 1930 or just before. This is in an oak cabinet made by the Carrington Manufacturing Company, who made a lot of woodwork, speaker cabinets and radio cabinets under the name Camco. Camco Casework were big suppliers to the radio trade in the early 30s. Oak veneered, and the interesting thing to look at is the shape of the magnet, which is rather different from the sort of magnets you get on modern speakers. It's a sort of squashed horseshoe shape. Magnetic materials weren't as efficient in those days, so the magnets had to be fairly hefty. So that's a Camco Casework box. It's got a pretty cabinet. I think that's the main attraction of it. The magnet in that is not quite the same as the one we've just seen. It's getting more to the round pot shape that we know, but much larger than the modern versions. But the feature is the cabinet. They made a bigger model, the cabinet about 50% bigger in the same style, and I think that's quite a pretty little speaker. Ones, some commercial ones, of which I've got a reasonable selection. The first one is this here. Now, it may not look very commercial to you because it looks very similar to some of the homemade ones we've looked at, but in fact there's a label on here which won't show up very well. In fact, it's quite hard to decipher, but what it says on it is the Radio Stores, Ellis and Company. The initials are unreadable, but the Radio Stores, Ellis and Company, Wem, Shropshire. So it's a set that would have either been made by that firm or made for them and sold to a customer with their label on. So we'll just have a look at it in more detail. It's the usual ebonite panel, tuning arrangement and reaction. I think that's right, but when we look at the back I can verify that, and a variable tapping on the coil. So we'll just pull it out of the case and have a look at the insides. Assuming it's not jammed in, which it's not. Put the case to one side, and there it is. Little supply wires out of the way. 3-valve, tapped coil, tappings from this switch on the front panel. There's a variometer in there of the type you've already seen on some of the other sets. That's for the that'll be for the reaction, and this capacitor here is the tuning capacitor. So you set your band, as it were, either medium or long wave or whatever, with this tapping point, and then use the variable capacitor for the tuning. Detector, AF output, audio transformer coupled. You can't see the label on it, but it's in fact another of these success ones that we've seen on earlier sets. Aerial input. Quite a well made set, but definitely sort of looks like some of the amateur sets in a sense, although it's made quite neatly. So it would be made possibly even by a local amateur enthusiast at the time for this particular establishment. If they didn't make them themselves, they would get people to do it. This was a typical sort of arrangement in the late 20s. The other interesting feature is there's no on-off switch on this set as such, and in fact there's a jack on the front panel. You plug your loudspeaker into this jack and it automatically switches on the low tension supply to the valve, so you don't have a switch to bother with. So that's the Ellis commercial set. We'll just put that to one side and look at this set, which is a brand set, or KB, well-known firm, which is still going to this present day, and in conjunction with STC, I think. It's an oak cabinet, quite a nice plated escutcheon, controls, wave change switch, short and long, it's noted, and the usual nomenclature of the time. Volume, which is in fact I think a filament rheostat, and reaction, which will be the usual variable capacitor. The tuning, not ganged, but this is the RF tuning and this is the detector tuning with a slow motion for one of them in the middle. Looking at the back, it obviously looks a bit more of a commercial, factory built job. Tin plated chassis of comparatively modern appearance. Those are the two variable capacitors. Screen grid valve, detector, output. The interesting thing about this output valve, it's a pentode, and you notice it's got a terminal on the side of the base. still using the old 4-pin base, which was used for triodes. When the first pentode came out, they didn't have 5-pin valve holders. They put the extra electrode on the terminal at the side, and later on this would be modified to have a centre pin with the new 5-pin bases, but there were quite often two models of the same valve in use at the same period. So that's the Colster Brands or KB receiver, again battery operated, like all the sets we've seen. Let's move that to one side and look at this one, which is a set made by Berndet, which is a well-known firm at the time, one of the pioneer manufacturers. Again, this has got a metal escutcheon with separated non-gang tuning, RF and detector, all calibrated in just in degrees, or 0 to 100. There's no meters yet appeared on these dials, and certainly no station names. And this would be the reaction control. We can take the back off quite easily and look what's inside. Little bag of screws. Again, a commercial looking job. The screen grid valve is mounted horizontally. Again, the output valve has got this side terminal, and there's tuning coils at right angles to each other, with a screen between, and the reaction condenser and the tuning condenser there. The case has wooden ends, and the rest is metal. Looks a bit rusty. It hasn't yet received the treatment from my restoration efforts. So that's the Etherphone screened screen 3. This is another commercially made battery set, made by a firm called Burton, who were mostly into the component field, but this was their first complete set, and they made one or two after that, but the firm didn't last all that long. It finished well before World War II. It's ebonite panel with their name engraved on it. Again, long and short wave, and off in the centre, tuning and reaction, a simple set. Nice oak case. Just look into it, there's not a lot to see. It's a sort of chassis construction. In fact, it's a Paxilin board with wooden supports at the end forming a chassis, and the valve holders are mounted as not as separate units, but integral with the chassis, and they're mainly Burton components underneath. So that's the Burton Empire 3 battery set. We'll go on now to the first of the main sets that I want to show you. Round about 1930, AC mains started to come in. Although a lot of people, of course, still didn't have them. Some have had DC mains and so on, but generally 230 volts AC was becoming standard. So this is Cossa's first attempt at a mains receiver. It's an oak case, not a very nice looking thing, rather squarish, but nevertheless it's got a key on it to prevent unauthorised entry, to pinch the valve, I suppose. Just two controls, tuning and reaction, and a very small viewing window with, again, just numbers on it. If you look inside, you can probably see just about a label that says, well, gives you some instructions on using the set, and there's also an engraving in the middle of that chassis plate. It says Cosa on it. It's a metal aluminium plate, and underneath there's the mains transformer, smoothing capacitors, etc. But the set is just a 2-valve plus rectifier. It's detector, output valve, and then a rectifier on the right hand side there, half wave rectifier. The output valve in fact is directly heated with a thick filament so that it wasn't affected by the varying AC and thus overcoming the hum problem. This problem generally, of course, was overcome with indirectly heated valves, but that particular one is a directly heated one used as an output valve. So that's the Cosa MR133, the first main set, without a loudspeaker, of course, used with one of the external speakers that we've already seen. And this one here is an unusual looking one. It's a Philips made in Holland around about 1931. Bakelite moulding. It was called Philite by Philips, a trade name for their particular Bakelite mouldings. AC pack inside, of course, supplying 4 volts to the valve heaters. Early Philips logo. Press the button and open the lid. 2 prongs here which fit into the sockets here and switch the mains on. When you lift the lid, the mains is switched off for safety precaution. Again, separate tuning controls operated by these small knobs, and you've got reaction and trimmers and a wave change switch. See the valves at the back there. There's screen grid valve with a top cap, detector and audio output and a rectifier. So that's an early Philips Bakelite set without a loudspeaker, of course. I'll show you some sets now from the early 30s with built-in speakers. Sets started to get heavier when AC mains operation came along, plus internal speakers, because both the mains transformers and the energized speakers used at the time had a lot of metal in them. Metal chassis and wooden cases were quite heavy. This advert has appeared quite a lot in the Radio Times recently, advertising remakes of old records on CD or whatever, and they feature this set here, which we have in fact got in front of us in the flesh, as it were. This is an Eco. Eco were in the forefront of moulding, Bakelite moulding techniques in the early 30s. They first had their cases made in Germany by a firm called AEG, who were moulding specialists amongst other things. And then when a tax was put on imported goods in the early 30s, Eco installed their own plant at South End and started producing their own mouldings. A very heavy, expensive machinery required, so very large production runs were wanted to make the whole thing economical. The M23 is a main set, but it's a straight set, not a superhet, with the usual tuning, reaction, wave change switch here, and again a very small dial, just with in fact it's got wavelengths on this time, long and short wavelengths, but no station names. Typical grill cloth of the time, sort of gold mesh, which is very popular. Very complicated moulding this, which necessitated hinged parts in the moulds, which is very expensive, and later on they went to much simpler shapes that could be extracted from the mould in one go. We'll just turn this round because the back is quite interesting. It's a wooden back, and the 3 valves are on view here, easily changed if necessary. RF valve, I think, yes, a screen grid valve there, variable mu, detector and output. The rectifier is a Westinghouse metal rectifier, there's a plate here that you won't be able to read, but it gives you the Westinghouse patents, etc. So that's the Eco M23 from 1931, quite a classical design of receiver, the shape usually referred to as Gothic cathedral style. Let's put that to one side and this wooden wireless, which is a Telsyn. Telsyn were famous for their components mainly, but they did produce a few complete sets, and this one round about 1932 was called the Telsyn McNamara. It was called the McNamara because Mr. McNamara was the managing director of Telsyn, so there was probably a bit of boardroom manoeuvring went on in naming that set. Someone probably got promoted by suggesting such a brilliant name. It's made entirely with Telsyn components. I'm not sure whether the back's off. No, it's not, so there's no point in looking in, but or in turning it round. But it's a straightforward mains operator receiver of the period, but quite a nice wooden case. They came in two shapes. There was a different pattern that you could buy in walnut, but this one came in plain wood, and you stained it yourself in whatever finish you wanted. This has been stained sort of dark oak and varnished quite nicely by whoever bought it. So that's the Telsyn McNamara. The year now is 1933, and the first set we look at here is another Eco from the Eco factory at Southend, cabinet made on their big moulding machines. And now we've arrived at the state where we've got station names on the dial. We don't in fact have an obvious pointer on this set. It's a shadow type pointer. There's a light behind the dial with a slit, and an illuminated pointer or effective pointer travels across the dial as you move the knob. The usual wave change and volume. This set is a super het, and one of the other features of it, a little bit of a luxury I suppose, is that by rotating this you can take the grill off and change the cloth if you're so inclined. Or this cloth I think matches the brown Bakelite quite well, but it's an added gimmick I suppose. And also of course they would have to provide a separate moulded item to fit in this aperture for the speaker drill. It would be rather complicated to mould this in one operation, so it fulfilled two purposes of being practical as far as the engineering point of view and providing a bit of a customer gimmick. Probably won't be able to get it on. More or less. Not quite. We'll leave it there. A bit skew. Doesn't matter. We'll fix it later. It was the tendency by this time to employ furniture designers to design the cabinets. That's why you get some of these quite exotic variations. So moving that to one side, and this one, which is in fact a battery transportable. It's on a turntable, you see it rotate, by a firm called Portadyne, and this is a characteristic Portadyne grail, quite a nice appearance. The dial is calibrated in wavelengths only and not station names. It's got side features here which can be used for lifting. We've got little slots under for getting hold of the thing. Can't see anything at the back. The back is in place, but that's a battery set, would be self-contained, and it has a frame area, which was quite a feature of portables until the ferrite rod came in the 50s and 60s. The Portadyne PB5 1933 battery portable. or transportable. (1934) is the year now, and this is made by Ultra Electric, who were again an up-and-coming name in the business in the early 30s, and they certainly stayed as a name for quite a long time in the radio industry. This is called Panther, and it's a mains TRF, that is a straight set. The tuning scale again is one of these light pointer scales. There are there's no actual pointer, but a light moves along, and there's a bulb behind it, so you see the shadow or the illumination on the scale. These are very typical ultra knobs. You see all the ultra sets of that period fitted with this particular sort of moulded knob. The nice feature of this set is the wood, which is I suppose figured walnut with these darker wood inserts, and this speaker motif is alleged to spell out the letters ultra. I suppose it does in an arty way. You've got a U, L, perhaps a T. This is a sort of representative R without the sticking out bit, and that's an obvious A in sort of Art Deco style. Quite a nice set, I think. Just perhaps angle it a bit so that you can look at it from another angle. The back is off, so we'll swing it round. Just have a look inside. Mainly airspace, as you see. These sets are very heavy, even though there's a lot of air in, because what you've got here, apart from anything else, is a hefty speaker with an energised winding on it, which puts quite a bit of weight into it. I was looking for the mains transformer. In fact, the mains transformer is quite small. It's down here, down on the chassis, let through the chassis. So that's quite a sort of modern idea. A lot of them are large, upstanding things. 3 screening coils, 2 RF stages, by the look of it, and the output stage. Yes, again with a side contact terminal and a valve rectifier. Quite a mighty piece of engineering, but an awful lot of air in it. You can imagine how many mini transistor sets you could fit in the same volume. (1934), and this is a product of the Ferranti factory. It's called the Lancastria. It's a super het, rather a nice two-toned cabinet, and for a change, shaped knobs. The dial, which may or may not show up as such, is in fact mottled simulated mother of pearl, which looks quite nice when it's illuminated with the dial lamp from the back. An unusual feature of this set is a tuning meter. There's a needle here, moving coil meter, which deflects when the signal is tuned to maximum. And there's also an indication on the side here of what position your tone control is in. There's an indication here of your tone control, and another indication here as well on something else. You can see these things moving about. It's full of a lot of little gimmicks really, but it's quite a nice set. Long and medium wave only. Now this thing that it's standing on is not a Ferranti product, but it's made by a firm called Halcyon, and in fact it's a shortwave converter. Most sets in the early to mid-30s were 2-wave band only, but when shortwave listening became popular, instead of having to buy a new set, which could be quite expensive, you could buy these converters, which were quite simple triode oscillators, offset from what is the equivalent of the intermediate frequency. You tuned your receiver to, I think, the lower end of the long wave band, and you varied this oscillator here until you could hear the particular shortwave band that you wanted. There are plug-in coils to go in the back for changing the range. So that's the shortwave converter, which was fairly popular before three wave band sets became generally available and slightly cheaper. Well, I haven't got a suitable example of a 1935 set to show you, but this is 1936, another product from the Eco factory, as you might be able to tell from the rather massive moulding. This is described in the brochure as a high fidelity consolette. It's a table model really, and it features a variable bandwidth control, and also the tuning button, if pressed, mutes the noise. It's like a sort of squelch, and you did your tuning in on this magic eye, which was a feature of this set. In fact, this was the first receiver to be, the first English-made receiver to be fitted with a magic eye or cathode ray tuning indicator. The output valve in this set is unusual in that it's got a 2-volt heater. Most valves at the time had 4-volt heaters before the 6.3s came in from America, but this is a Mullard peculiar valve with a 2-volt heater, the ACO42. Not very easy to get, but I've got one or two spares. The design style is usually referred to as Egyptian Temple Art Deco, and it grows on you. It's quite nice. They did make a nicer model in moulded black Bakelite with cream knobs and escutcheon and so on. But this is a standard brown model. It's of interest to look in the back. It's a double-decker. The receiver chassis, superhet chassis in the top. These are the IF transformers. Things are getting a bit smaller by this time. The IF transformers aren't as big as they might have been, not as big as TRF tuning coils. And the valves now, you notice, have got slip-on top caps rather than terminals. Power pack in the bottom, and that's the back end of the speaker magnet, an energized speaker, as was quite common in these early sets, and there's a loom going from the power supply to the receiver proper. So that's the Eco of 1936. Well, this is a 1937 3-wave band set, so it's got the short waves on. Rather an attractive multicoloured dial. Sets were becoming much more pleasant to look at by this time, and this was a consideration for sales, of course. A veneered insert here which sets it off rather nicely, and this speaker cloth is not the original. This is one of the snags with old sets. You quite often get damaged cloths, and it's very difficult to get the original pattern, but this is a more modern cloth which is a reasonable match for the period. This set's a favourite of mine because when I got it, it was a complete wreck. The top was completely smashed in. It had a great weight on it, and all this was cracked, and it was quite a rebuilding job and a repolishing job to make it look presentable. But it's quite a good set in appearance and in function. Just look at the back. It's got a wooden back. A lot of the pre-war sets had wooden backs rather than the compressed cardboard that were current later on, and little caps. of, I don't know what those are, but bits and pieces. But look at the chassis, it's quite a nice carbon plated chassis, and comparatively modern looking really, compared with some of the sets we've looked at. And the speaker again is mains energised, fairly heavy. But the whole set is not too bad, because it's a universal set, so it doesn't have a mains transformer, it has series valves. So that's the Decca 66 triple wave band of 1937. (1938), and this table model battery set was made by a firm called J.G. Graves of Sheffield. They made cheaper sets which were often advertised by mail order. They also sold vacuum cleaners and things like that. So they were the lower end of the market, but nevertheless quite a nicely designed cabinet, simple, with an attractive dial. I can't remember whether this would be illuminated or not. I think not. For battery economy, they tended not to illuminate their dials. But it is quite a nice appearance set. It's been, it was a wreck when I got it. It's been stripped down and repolished, so it's turned out quite nice in appearance. So that's the Graves battery superhet, and incidentally the intermediate frequency is 127 kilohertz rather than the 465 which was adopted in most sets in the mid-30s, but low frequency was still in use in many designs. Now this one is a 1939 portable on a turntable. It's made by Listen. Listen was taken over by Eveready in the 30s, but they carried on using the name Listen for quite a time. Got some interesting shaped knobs, and the slow motion is one of these annoying ones where you turn the knob one way and the pointer goes the other way. I think we mentioned that before, but it's quite a nice little portable, but it'll be interesting to compare it with some of the post-war portables, and in fact you'll be surprised that they hadn't really progressed very much just after World War II as far as size was concerned. So that's the Listen Sunshine Portable, as it was described in the literature in 1939. Another long and exclusive. Right, we've got an object of furniture now, 1938, and this is a grandmother clock radio made by a firm called Tempervox in Croydon in 1938, and the theory was in their advertising blurb that the modern house, the small modern house at the time, didn't have room for a clock and a radio, so that was their excuse for bringing out this fairly novel setup. The clock, in fact, is a standard Smith's electric clock, which I'll just show you. Hinge front, and there's the clock, and there's the radio. You can't see a lot of it, probably see an electrolytic condenser and one or two odds and ends. It's an AC/DC set, so there isn't a transformer in it. There's a Beretta, which is a valve to, or rather well, it's in a valve envelope, but in fact it's a lamp really to control the series current of the heater chain. So it's quite a simple circuit. Two-wave band. The original set was one-wave band, but there's a wave change switch been added to this by the factory, of course, and there's now it's now medium and long wave. Rather nice cabinet. This is where I do my Arthur Negus bit, you know, don't point to things, back of the hand stuff. A rather nice walnut veneered column. Where the pendulum should be, there's a loudspeaker, and this is the original silk cloth. The other sets of this type which I've seen illustrated have usually got a replacement cloth here, so it's quite pleasing that this has got the original silk, a bit tatty, but at least it's not damaged. The fittings, as it were, are picked out in black enamel, and the whole thing is well, it's called late 30s Art Deco. I quite like it. It reminds me of an Egyptian mummy standing up with the hair hanging down, but it's usually described as an Egyptian temple style, but I quite like it. It's not a clock radio in the sense that the clock controls the radio as in modern ones. It's just a separate clock and a separate radio in one convenient unit, as the manufacturers would have you believe. And you can see the height of it. It's grandmother clock height, about 5'4", I think. So the Tempovox clock radio of 1938. Rather a nice bit of furniture. Is that about the right angle? September the 3rd, 1939, World War II started, and obviously a lot of the radio industry effort was devoted to communications and radar equipment for the services. So a lot of the pre-war sets had to continue in use for a few years, but in 1940 Philips did produce one new design, this one here, the 206A, which is of great interest to me because this was the first main set that my parents ever bought. My father bought it in 1940. It was a fairly new style, and it's the set on which I spent a great deal of time listening to short waves and getting really interested in radio. It's Bakelite, of course, and it's what's called a short superhet, frequency changer, IF valve, and then double diode pentode output valve, so there are only 3 valves in the superhet circuit, and the performance is very good. A mains rectifier as well. The Wireless World at the time gave it a very good write-up, and I can vouch for the fact that it was very sensitive. I had great fun with it. It has side contact valves, but very soon they modified the chassis to take the international octal valves. I've got an example with the octal valves, but the appearance is exactly the same as this. So that was a wartime design. There were a number of other wartime designs, but of which I've got a few, but they're rather heavy sets and haven't been able to dig them out. So this is the only example of the wartime design that I've got, apart from the next item which we'll look at, which is of great interest. Well, by about 1943, radio sets were getting in short supply because service engineers were in the forces, components were hard to get, so it was difficult to get old sets repaired, and the government decided that this situation had to be dealt with because people relied on the radio to keep their morale up and to keep in touch with events. So they directed the radio industry to produce a standard set which would be cheap, easily produced. Murphy were given the job of designing the set, and they produced a single waveband design. There was no long wave broadcasting during the war because we only had one high-powered broadcast transmitter, and that would have been a giveaway for direction finding for German aircraft. So it was taken out of use, and broadcasting was confined to the medium waves. This is the basic set, commonly called a utility set or an austerity set, but it was pointed out that the term utility was really a misnomer, because utility was officially applied to furniture which did not have purchase tax applied to it, which was the predecessor of VAT, and purchase tax was certainly chargeable on radio sets. So this officially became the wartime civilian receiver, which is the proper name to be given to it. So single waveband, medium wave only, very plain dial, very simple mechanism, and calibrated with medium wave wavelengths, and the indications here are just home and forces, which were the principal BBC programs at the time. The original set was in a plain pine cabinet, which you can see here, but a lot of retailers had their sets painted or stained. In fact, Peter White, G3ETH, tells me that when he worked for Guy's at the beginning of the war, or sorry, at the end of the war, one of his jobs as a lad was to take these cabinets to the furniture department of Brown's of Chester and have them stained a suitable colour to enable them to be sold more easily as more attractive sets. After the war, long wave broadcasting came in again, so there's rather a glut of these sets, and manufacturers started to modify them to cover the long wave band. In fact, with good foresight, the original chassis did in fact have a hole in the middle to take a wave change switch, and it was easy to fit the long wave to them. So this is the wave change switch on the centre. But the dials were still a bit makeshift. They just had the long wave written in over the medium wavelengths. But there was one manufacturer, unknown, who produced from scratch in 1945 or thereabouts a 3-wave band version. So this was a factory-made 3-wave band set. In fact, I'm indebted to Mrs. Butler for the gift of this set. It was one that John had, and which he'd mentioned to me a long time before he passed away. And I never thought any more about it, but some months after he died, they were clearing out the garage and they came across this, so I was given it. And rather pleasingly, it's this rather unique set, which is officially provided with the long wave band, with the long wave as well as the medium wave calibration figures on it. We don't know who manufactured that set. The wartime civilian receiver was manufactured by about 40 different manufacturers, and there is a code number on the back of each set from which you can identify the manufacturer, but not on this one. The valves were also coded so that you could refer to the manufacturer's data, but they were given a common code number rather than a commercial number. Very interesting sets, and a lot of people collect them and probably try to get one from every manufacturer, which must be quite a task, because I'm not even sure that every one of the 40 coded manufacturers did in fact produce this set. This is was made by Pi. That one was made by Marconi Phone, and as I say, this is of unknown manufacturer. So that's the wartime civilian receiver. Moving on to the immediate post-war period, 1946, these are 2 battery portable sets. This is by Bush, and this is by Pi. And the interesting thing about these is that they use 1.4 volt filament valves, but octals rather than the all-glass miniatures that are used in later sets. So they were quite big chassis, and quite hefty batteries, and they were really rather large. even compared with the Listen portable, which I showed you earlier, made in 1939, they're in fact certainly as big as that was. This Pi one was in fact given to me by our old friend Reg G3DRB. The grill is typical of the period 1947. It's what I call deck chair canvas. It's very coarse material. There must have been a shortage of decorative materials at the time, because there are quite a number of sets from 1946, 47 which are covered with this rather plain looking tough material. So those are a couple of portables, so-called portables, from the immediate post-war period. Well, here's a much smaller battery portable of 1948, and this uses the 1.4 volt glass miniature valves and the smaller batteries, so it's quite neat and small compared with the rather large portables that we've just looked at. This set here is a mains set, and it's called Imagitronic. It's by a firm called Hale Electric, who marketed things under the trade name Etronic, and this particular one is a Bakelite, painted Bakelite case, small, compact superhet. The interesting thing is the tuning pointer is mounted in front of the loudspeaker, so saving space. And in fact, this particular case with suitable knobs and dial was sold on the do-it-yourself market for people to build their own sets in. But it's quite a neat little set, which was available in various other colours as well. I've got a few Roberts sets here, which are rather interesting. This one here is, I call it the King's set, because there's a photograph of the King and Queen in 1948, and the title of the photograph is "The King Listens to the Wireless," and he's twiddling about with one of these Roberts sets. It may be a slightly earlier one. I suspect this was perhaps a pre-war, but the design of cabinet was certainly current after the war, and it uses Mullard side contact valves. It's got the old Roberts logo on it, which I'm told looks like a Tok H lamp. It's an Aladdin's lamp, I think. This was the old Roberts symbol, which disappeared after a time, in favour of this symbol here. This set is a valve stroke battery portable. As a switch you could change over from valves to batteries, but the dial layout bears a certain similarity to the old King set. And what's interesting about this, I think, is the similarity between this and one of Roberts's early transistor sets, a very similar sort of dial layout. Transistor sets are now 30 or 40 years old, so they are collectible in their own right, and makes like Roberts and Dynatron are well worth collecting. I'm not suggesting anyone should collect some of the black moulded things that are available now, but some of these early transistor sets are particularly well made and of nice appearance, and well worth putting into a collection. They're not valves, they're transistors, but they are still becoming classics. Ah, yes, there's another one here we haven't looked at. That's this set that is in a leather case. Looks like a pair of binoculars. That is in fact a valve radio. Probably the last valve radio that Roberts made, and in fact it has a printed circuit with a miniature valve mounted on it. Quite a compact sort of set in a real leather case. Roberts produced some very good quality cases, and in fact on this R200 transistor model they did produce one covered in mink, and also a gold plated one which was available for around about £2,000, but that one was much cheaper. Just like to show you this Bush receiver from the 50s, 1950. This particular design came out. It was quite a revolutionary design, post-war design produced for an exhibition called the Britain Can Make It exhibition of 1945 or so, and it received quite a lot of headlines, and it uses octal valves, and the wave change switch is on the front, and the tuning switch, tuning knob is on the side. Now later on, Bush went over to miniature valves and produced the 90A, which is a very similar cabinet, but you see that the wave change switch is now on the side rather than on the front, but generally a similar appearance. And these were, and still are, regarded as classic Bakelite sets. They were available in cream. There's a cream one here, and also in green, I think, although I haven't come across a green one. They still give good service and are regarded as quite a Bakelite classic, as it were. That's the Bush DAC 90 series. Right, I'll finish up by showing 3 more transistor sets, because as I said, transistors are collectible now, and this particular one is a table radio which looks very similar to a mains model which Bush brought out, but they kept the appearance, and in fact these sets were known as cordless sets when they first came out, because of course they didn't have a mains lead. Quite a nice moulded plastic case, push button, wave change, etc., and quite an attractive model. And this is another attractive case, polished wooden case by Perdio. Perdio made only transistor sets and televisions. They weren't in the valve set market, but this is an early example which is rather large for a transistor set, but nevertheless a rather nice item. Now the last thing we've got here is a bit of an amusing thing, really. What is it, you might ask? Well, it's got the appearance generally of a vintage American table set, but it's got this quartz clock, and in fact it's an FM radio made in China. It's called a Cosmo Nostalgia radio. You can make of it what you like, but it is a transistor set, and today's junk is tomorrow's collectible, and that's why I've got it. And in fact it works quite nicely as well. Well, if you're going to collect vintage radios and repair them and construct replicas and so on, you need information, and there's an awful lot of information contained in old magazines from the 20s onwards. A few of them here, some of them possibly still well-known names: Wireless World and Radio Review, as it was in the early 20s, now Electronics and Wireless World. Popular Wireless from the 30s, Wireless Magazine from the 20s to 30s period, Modern Wireless, Amateur Wireless, the Wireless Weekly, the Wireless Review, the Wireless Constructor. You name it, you'll find the title. There were a vast number of magazines for the home constructor and the amateur enthusiast from the mid-20s onwards, and they're always useful sources of information, adverts, articles, etc., and very essential if you're trying to find information on early radios. There are also a number of modern books available for those who are interested. If we look across on the right at the back at the book called Radio, this is what I call our Bible, because it contains a vast amount of information on the history of radios, and a large number, getting on for 1,000 photographs showing different models from the early days right up to the transistor age. It's written by one of the founder members of the British Vintage Wireless Society. Another useful book is the Practical Handbook of Valve Radio Repair by Jas Miller, and to its left this most recent publication by the Radio Manufacturers Association called the Set Makers, and this is a really superb history of the radio industry from the early days right up to modern times, and well worth reading. Even if you're not seriously into vintage radio, you'll find it a good story. These two books are in fact in the Chester Library. I saw them the other day. I think that is available also. Unfortunately, that's out of print at the moment, but I understand Jonathan Hill is reissuing it. One or two more here: Cat's Whisker, Radio Art, Early Wireless, all by members of the British Vintage Wireless Society. Radiophile magazine, issued by Charles Miller. Vintage Wireless, the Journal of the British Vintage Wireless Society, and a must for anyone who's seriously into vintage radios, as I am.
Description of what's going on, John?
Well, I'm standing here waiting for you to ask me something.
Right, well, it's obviously well used, and so it's
Well, workbench.
in front with a current project.
Yes, that's maybe the next item to be renovated. Bit of a wreck, but that's the way I like them.
Well, we just pan round and have a look at a few of the bits and pieces. Obviously some old speakers here, which some of which we haven't seen before.
Yeah. So
And
that's what do you call it? Blue spot cabinet.
right. And another old radio at the top there, a broadcast type.
That one.
Yes.
That's a Bush, I think. Forget what the type is. Got a peculiar sort of canvas speaker grill on the outside.
And then you have one below it as well.
Right,
That's
it's an AC-70 colour. Oh, that's Pilot Little Maestro, probably just post-war.
and we can see Meccano at the top.
Oh well, that's another thing. Make machines, coil winders, etc., and cranes for the kids and so on, and amuse themselves generally. Very useful. You can make machines quite quickly and try them out.
I see below you've got quite a lot of paperwork there, no doubt.
Oh, vintage magazines.
Yeah.
be promoted to a cupboard in the house very soon. So you can look at them more easily.
Right, so we just pan around, have a little bit more of a look at the shop with some more modern equipment.
Don't forget to look at the valve tester, most essential.
Down at the bottom there, yes. We can bypass that.
Dennis's favourite, HRO.
Oh yes, of course. And then of course round onto the components.
There's an accumulator.
I always remembered of those as little Clanche cells, but they were slightly different, weren't they?
Yes, they were non-rechargeable. These are rechargeable lead acid.
Right, we'll pan back and we'll look down into the back cave, as Peter White calls it, and pass some more.
Peter White spends many an hour looking around here and telling me all about the things that he used to service. When he comes across an old set, he gets quite carried away.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff there, isn't it? The 1155's down there, I see.
Well, there's only two of them there. There's
Oh,
another
yeah.
one up on the shelf, waiting the day when they may be renovated. There's an HRO as well.
The one with the octal valves waiting to be refurbished.
And some of them bits and pieces we've seen previously
Yes,
in the.
well, they've had to come out to make room for more.
These boxes at the end here, these slightly curved ones, seem familiar to me.
Well, they were known as pie black boxes. They're in fact brown boxes, but the original pie black box was a black box. It's a 4-speed record player with built-in amplifier, mono of course, with the old BSR mono deck.
Yeah, they used to have those in my school days in the 50s. I remember listening to Grieg's piano concerto for the first time off of one of those.
Oh yes, well they still work.
So we'll stop it there for a moment. We'll go down the other end.
Homemade from the early 30s.
All right, if you can say that again, John. We
Yeah,
just,
looking at a homemade battery portable from the early 30s. A couple of these dials on them, which we've seen before on the other sets. When I got that, there was an HT battery in it and grid bias battery.
Right, well we move down the other end now and have a look at the other end of the back cave. Right, we're running again, so we're looking down towards the workshop end of the shack from the garage door end. Must be some 15 to 20 foot long, and we can see quite a lot of equipment.
Junk.
John says junk, but to my mind it's a museum. Very privileged to see it. Some of this equipment we've seen during the course of the video. So there's the cabinet that we looked at earlier, the radio cabinet, and various other bits and pieces that I think we haven't seen. And some of John's Meccano there.
That's a coil. That's a wire insulating machine for lapping cotton insulation onto copper wire to simulate certain types of vintage wire that was used for wiring up sets.
Yeah, the old 1155 you were mentioning is up there alongside some weighing scales.
Yes, collectible weighing scales.
Yeah.
Bit of a
Tucked up
loudspeaker next to them.
That's right. So, and a lot more stored stuff in cardboard boxes.
All carefully labelled, so I don't know what's in them.
And here we are with a bit more of John's boxes of stuff, valve stabilisers, amongst other things. So we'll just move round. This is up by the garage door now, and as you can see there's a few more radios, etc. Is that a television set? No, it's not. It's a radio.
Which one?
This one in front, yeah.
That one? That's the back of a Pi International. Quite an interesting set.
Yeah.
The only reason we haven't looked at it, it's too heavy to carry into the house.
Yes, there's another one there. The back of, I think it says KB on the back.
KB ER30.
Yeah. And down below we have a fair bit of stuff on the floor. I think one of those we saw, which I'm on now, just beyond the paintbrush.
Oh, yes, the sloper.
And
City 3.
and here right in the doorway, another broadcast radio.
Oh, yes. Not sure what that is. Ever ready, I think.
Ever ready,
Ever
yes,
Is that
that's
ER,
right.
Mm.
And well, down below it is something else which
Oh, it's an
you can't see much of.
It's an Ambassador bookshelf models, it's called.
And there's a Bakelite set at the top here.
Bakelite set. Oh, this is another Philips 206, a scrap one
Ah, right.
for spares.
Okay. Well, we'll pan round and we'll look down the side here, see what we can get. We'll try and move the camera over slightly, see what we can do. Excuse the lumps and the bumps, but a lot more stuff piled up here. Obviously housing for the lawnmower. The garage has to serve more than one purpose.
Anything but taking the car.
Oh, cars are only a nuisance, aren't they?
Mm.
Especially when you have to pay for them. I can't see too much there, it's easily identifiable, but if we move the camera again, we can move over to our left and we'll see what we can get down the side.
Right, shall I dodge around this way?
That's right, John. And I'll come back out as well. I think we're about there now.
Right.
And of course now we can look down the side, which is almost full length, at the radios, etc., which are stacked up along this wall.
I think you said you had one of those, didn't you?
Yes, that's right.
That's a Bakelite Cosmo Melody Maker from the 50s.
Yeah, I remember my father having one of those, and I think he traded that in for a radio rentals,
Ah, yes.
which is again a Bakelite sort of set.
Oh, that's right.
And I seem to remember particularly the name Hilversum.
Oh, yes, one of the Dutch broadcast stations.
So we used to listen to a lot of jazz programs in those days.
Also the home of Philips, Hilversum, I think.
Ah.
That's Eindhoven, isn't it, the home of Philips?
Yes, that's Germany though, isn't it?
No.
No?
Holland.
I know.
Holland.
I always thought it was Germany.
Eindhoven, Holland.
Oh, there we go. I say down there along the top shelf there's another one that I seem to recognise.
Well, that's another Melody Maker. The knob's the
Yeah.
same as this one. It is the wooden version.
Oh, right.
Same escutcheon, same knobs, different chassis.
And further down there's two side by side. Another one that looks similar to the Melody Maker. The far one.
Up there,
Yep.
Oliver Bush plastic and high waveband set.
Right. Anyway, we'll go down below now, just see what we have there before we finish off.
Lots of loudspeakers around. 'Cause,
Yes.
From Strat radios, but always useful for replacements.
And some of the stuff we've seen in this last session. Well, thank you very much, John.
Okay.
It's been a privilege for me
Pleasure.
to see such a vast amount of vintage equipment. I've probably had the best deal out of all of this, as I've had the extended session. But I do thank you very much indeed for taking the time,
Okay.
and I hope that this will actually be a good record for you to view on the occasion you're feeling sentimental.
Thank you, and thanks very much to the production team, to the cameraman, the director, the producer, the grip, the electrician, all named Dave. Very good.
Yeah, that's the trouble with TV people, they're all named Dave, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again, John.
Okay.
I'm sure our members will want to give their appreciation as well. Thanks once again.